We've got an Ampeg VL1002 on the bench today. This is a Lee Jackson designed 2-channel tube amplifier with a built-in attenuator, effects loop. I mean, there's a key lock on this amp, which you don't see every single day of the week. I just want to pull some tones with this and crank it up. A massive thank you to Frank and Vinny for loaning me this amp. They're friends of mine. They are absolute legends, and they've got a pretty awesome collection of gear as well. We definitely share a lot of similar tastes in music and gear, so I'm excited to rip into this one. Let's go. Let's start out on channel 2 because we all want to hear some crunch tones first, right? I've got a 1990 Les Paul Custom with burst buckers plugged straight into the amp. That's going to a Marshall 1960B loaded with some 75-watt Celestians. However, I have inserted the fractal X-Load between the output of the amplifier and the input of the cabinet. So the cabinet is going to be providing the load, but I'm taking a DI from the X-Load and running it through my free LTTV Mix 7 cab IR. You can grab that one for free in the video description. We'll start out with the mid-frequency control at 3 out of 5, so in the middle. I'm going to start with the gain control all the way off. So in this setup, the preamp control is going to control the amount of gain, and they're going to be interactive. You'll hear that as I turn the gain control up and turn the preamp control up or down. Basically, the preamp control, the higher it goes, kind of the muddier and darker everything gets. So if you want more of a tight, bright crunch, you keep the preamp low and use the gain control. If you want like a thicker, saturated sound, then you just turn the preamp up a bit higher. Frequency control at 5 and 1 are vastly different on there. 1 is really scooped and has this low to low mid boost happening. 5 is very, very mid-rangey and in your face. Very Plexi inspired on there. And you can see I've been running the bass quite low on this. I think running the bass too high on this immediately becomes Mudtown, and you really need to balance out the gain control, the bass control, what's happening with the mid frequency, and what's happening with the preamp control. So if you keep the preamp a little bit lower, something like this, crank the gain, you can kind of turn the bass up a little bit more, but you'd want to maybe run the mid frequency on 4 or 5, something like that. Pretty interesting. There are a lot of different tonal points you can hit on there. I don't love all of them. There are some that I really like in there. There's a very definable mid-range to upper mid-range thing happening in there, especially with the Les Paul. It's almost like this clicky kind of sound that I'm getting out of it, which I suspect is due to the preamp design and the filtering, and again, where you set the preamp control versus the gain control on there. That in combination with that mid-range control does remind me of the Lee Jackson Metaltronics. I think the Metaltronics is a little easier to get that classic brown sound out of, whereas this leans a little more to kind of a sludgy, grungy sounding amp in there. I did suspect they might just be direct copies of one another, but I think this definitely sounds different with this setup anyway. And you could hear on there that the attenuator, when it's normalized, I mean, it doesn't quite sound super transparent, but I think it's got a cool sound, and it's nice being able to take this from stupid loud to just like plain responsible loud on there. I think if you were recording with this and you weren't in the room with the amp, crank it up, leave the attenuator off. It definitely feels different in that setup. But you know, if you had to drop your volume at a gig, having the built-in attenuator is a pretty awesome and very forward-thinking feature on there. Let's hit channel 1 now, and we'll start with the preamp gain up on this, because this does a pretty cool AC/DC style crunch on here. That's really cool with the preamp control cranked, the attenuator on, and the channel master cranked on there. That's unexpected. I really like that. Let's try cranking up the master on the second channel now. I'm going to keep the mid-frequency control nice and low, crank up the gain, keep the preamp below noon or 1 o'clock on there. I kind of like keeping that there so it doesn't get too flubby or bloated on there. I've got the preamp and the guitar bypass. You heard it come on and off a few times during that clip, but this is just going to be the bridge humbucker. Heaps of attenuation happening on there. I might even play this clip and then turn the attenuator off and turn the master down so you can hear the difference. Much like the Metaltronics that we looked at a couple of months ago, this is definitely not modern high gain. This amp absolutely sounds like it is a product of all the designs and the ideas and the preferences in tone that were circulating around in the late 80s to early 90s. It is significantly cheaper than a Metaltronics though, and you can still find these around for decent prices in decent condition on here. I think there are some really thoughtful features on there, like the built-in attenuator, the ability to bypass and pad the effects loop on here, and there's just some really, really strange things like the key lock control on here. I mean, if you ever owned this amp and ever used that feature, please let me know in the comment section below. I imagine it might have just become pretty annoying to have to carry around a key or strapping it onto the amp on there. But yeah, it's a cool little artifact that we've had a look at today. A massive thank you to Frank and Vinny for loaning me this amp. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the tones in this video in the comment section below. You can grab my free IR in the video description. And if you like what I'm doing on the channel, various ways to support me are linked in the video description as well. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.